Okay, so Workiva, you fairly recently published the ESG Practitioner Survey, and I think there were a couple of, I don't know if anomalies is the right word, or apparent contradictions it revealed.
Yeah.
The first one being that I think the practitioners you surveyed or talked to, they seem to be confident in the accuracy of their ESG data. But when you ask them about the impending EU Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, I think there was a similar quantity, if you like, said they were not so confident at producing the right information for that. So what's going on there?
Yeah, I think what we have to understand, right, that it's a new disclosure requirement at this level of detail within sustainability, which means there's a lot of new areas that firms need to disclose on that historically they haven't been needed to go into the same level of depth with. Therefore, I think it's just normal, or sort of a normal reaction from companies and from practitioners to say, yes, we know we have to report on it. So the firm itself is obviously confident that we're going to do it. But at the same time, with the amount of new information that they need to produce, they obviously are a bit concerned to be able to sort of source the information. Because what we have to understand with this new European Sustainability Reporting requirements, ESRS, I'm going to say that again, the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are the reporting requirements of the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, so the standards you have to report on. They are at such a level of detail required that we're talking about over 1,100 data points potentially can be reported on. But what's even more complex with that is you are not just talking about numerical data, which sometimes it gives you a bit more comfort. You say, oh, we're going to source a number. Here is the number from, let me report on it. That's obviously a bit simpler to be able to say we can sort and we can report. But 30% of those 1,100 data points are numerical. The rest of them are semi-narrative and narrative, which means you need to be able to source a data point that is now text, narrative, which most likely are going to come from internal departments or internal sources to be able to describe how you are going to achieve certain things, what you're going to change, which means if you have currently not engaged those parts of your business historically, there might be a bit of concern to say, okay, who are we going to speak to? Who are we going to sort of get that information from? So there will be a bit of a contradiction there, but from saying, one, yes, we are confident we're going to report on it because we have to. We're going to achieve this. But then also at the other one saying, there are some complexities in finding the right data and the right people. Hence, you have that sort of two-pronged approach to say, yes, we are confident, but also we are a bit nervous about where we're getting to. And just one very final point there. When we're talking about the numerical data, we're talking about certain types of pieces of information, you have to engage your value chain. So you can't just look at you yourself. You have to look how this is in your value chain, your supply chain. If you don't have a really good reach out program or a really good communication with some of your suppliers, some of your value chain companies sitting further down, but there are concerns obviously how to source that piece of information, which obviously just put even more pressure on the process, which then causes you to have to define that process to be able to do it. So there are moving parts here, there are new parts and there are new pieces of information, which in my opinion is why it's causing that dual approach, almost saying we're confident, but also we're a bit nervous about it.
Yeah, and bearing in mind what you've just described, which is, I think it's fair to say a lot of complexity is being added. I think you also perhaps surprisingly uncovered the fact that obviously if companies have to adapt their processes because they have to comply with this new legislation, that's fine. But you also found that a lot of companies that potentially don't have to, I guess that if they're not covered by the EU regulations, but they still intended to actually comply, do their own way of complying with our legislation. So they're sort of volunteering to put themselves through pain, if you like.
Yeah.
So what's going on there?
That's a really good way of saying it. But I actually think what has happened in the last few years, if we start with the non-financial reporting directive, and I'm not going to go further back than that, but came in and was it first reporting on the EU taxonomy, which is a economical activity breakdown of your own operations to see how sustainable you are, which was reported in 2022 for the first time, but also enforce companies in the European Union to sort of report on sustainability matters in our sustainability disclosure. We've seen with the push for the mandatory reporting, we've seen that that's the new gold standard now. If you want to if you are going to fulfill your shareholders, stakeholders, interest groups requirements put upon a company operating in certain regions, you're going to have to start sort of considering that sustainability is no longer just a nice to have or a bit of a, I'm not, a bit more sort of non-detailed information that a company is putting out just to make themselves look good. Now it's actually a proper analysis of your operations, which will help investors and governments to actually make decisions. And so when the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive came out and the level of detail it came out, and because it was the first one that came out, I think a lot of companies saw it as a way to say, okay, if we are going to get a competitive advantage, if we are going to show the market that we take this serious and actually report it, we are going to use these requirements to create our reporting, even if we are not sort of falling under the requirement of the regulation. Equally, if you are going to get such a competitive advantage, or if you don't want to fall behind your peers, it's important that you actually sort of elevate yourself to say, even though our European peer or competitor is reporting on this requirement because they have to, we don't have that requirement yet. But for us not to lose out, or for us not to be seen and taken as serious, or for the market to sort of scrutinize us in an undue way compared to them because they provide information to the public, we are going to meet those requirements anyway. So I think you're seeing this sort of movement within the market now to say that sustainability information at this level of detail is no longer just sort of the nice to have us, or a way of saying we are doing something good to recycle or cut emissions. Is far bigger, which means that companies don't want to miss out or be left behind. And a final point to make on that question as well is obviously there is a global requirement. So the ISSB, so IFRS Foundation, came out with the IFRS S1 and S2, which is around so general requirement and climate requirements. They are moving in that direction to create that gold standard globally. But there's obviously country by country implementation that needs to happen, which means there are countries that already have implemented that standard from the IFRS S1 and S2 to be reported on. But there are other countries that still haven't gotten to that point where there's even a consultation out in the market to be able to sort of start reporting on it or see what the country is going to enforce. Hence, they go and look at what is already available there, what has already sort of been around for a while, and let's report on it to show that we actually are taking these topics seriously.
Okay, so and I guess it's fair to say from what you've described there that ESG sort of regulations are definitely starting to bite, to have an impact on companies, and the approach to respond to that, if you like, seems to be integrated reporting is seem to be the best way of doing it. So perhaps you can just say a little bit about that.
So if we start with the first point, there is obviously one of the key sort of items come out of the survey, right? When they said the global ESG regulation started to bite. And as I mentioned a few times, well, historically, what it's been a voluntary disclosure requirement a lot of the time. You as a company could almost pick what you wanted to report to show what you've done well, to show the market that you were doing something well. That is no longer the sort of, that's no longer how you can do it. You have to sort of meet requirements by, under the CSRD, you do a double materiality assessment, effectively showing if it's material to us or not, we're going to have to report on it, and this is what you're going to have to report. Meaning you are far more prescribed of what it is you report. So there's a disruption to your reporting process. There's a disruption to your information gathering process, to your data process, controls process, sign-off process, and then assurance process, meaning the new reporting requirements are enforcing you to literally look at all of those different parts to either create new processes or if you already have had a really robust reporting process for sustainability before, make sure that it meets the requirements around controls, to be able to meet assurance requirements, to be able to meet sign-off, attestation, all of these points that historically has been a financial disclosure sort of requirement is now being obviously put on the sustainability disclosures. So when we say it's starting to bite, it's far bigger, it's far more data that needs to be gathered. It's a far more sort of scrutinized process you need to have set up to be able to meet those assurance and control requirements required for the market to actually trust what you put out there. And one final point to make on that, it's also quite interesting if we start looking at the differences between the executive view and the non-executive. So if you look at the doers or the result from the practitioners, the overall result was 59% of respondents agree that the ESG regulation is disrupting the company's reporting processes. But if you look at the executives, it's actually a higher number. It's up to 65%, which obviously show there are some discrepancies between what executives are viewing this, how they're viewing this, and versus the rest of the organizations.
And in terms of the integrated reporting, that presumably is what you said earlier, in the old days, people could just pick and choose bits that they wanted to present, was integrated reporting. Now they've got to put together a coherent overall picture of what they're doing. Is that right?
Yeah, so on the integrated report is what is so important to understand here now is there is no sort of a sustainability disclosure and a finance disclosure. It's one and the same, right? And these two topics actually interacts with each other, because your financial disclosure is actually showing your economical spend on certain things that then sits in the sustainability disclosure. You need to be able to show the market and show the reader how these tie together, meaning that it needs to be a singular cohesive report where you tell a story that, so how you are going to achieve certain things, what the impact will be, even more important, how that will impact your financial results as well. Because if you look at the comprehensive impact to your organization, let's say you're going to meet a target that's a short, medium, and long term, as you have to set, let's say medium-term target. In the sustainability disclosure, you might explain that we are going to change X, Y, and Z to be able to meet that. But you simultaneously have to then obviously tell that this could have a financial impact. Because if we are going to change the process significantly, we're going to do investments in machinery. All of these obviously have an impact on your financial side, which means if you can't do that tied together, you will obviously not have the trust of the market. And the reader will then tell you that you haven't explained to us how this will impact the financials from what you're doing on the sustainability side. Equally, on the other side, if you are doing, cost-cutting measures, how does that actually impact your sustainability side? We mean they are now one and the same, because what's even more important there is obviously the assurance, mandatory assurance being put on it. Yes, you have limited assurance in the beginning for the sustainability part. There will be firms that going for reasonable assurance, which is the more heavy one that's done currently on the financial disclosure part from an earlier stage, but limited assurance, that is there to give the reader and the market the trust that it has gone through scrutiny to make sure that what has been said is correct to the point of the assurance requirement. So this integrated reporting is the new way of doing it. It's one report. You have to be able to sort of tie them together. So you need that sort of almost think about it as a singular process, although it's different topics.
Yeah, and you mentioned assurance a couple of times there, and I believe the survey points out that assurance creates accountability and also drives performance. So yeah, could be good to understand a bit more about that.
Yeah, assurance is really important here, because if we, as I mentioned a few times, if we look at the history around sustainability disclosure, it hasn't had any mandatory assurance on top of it, which means if you are putting a statement out there, if you're putting sort of a report out there, but you say we haven't got an assurance, the reader should probably not look at it and say this is the gospel. This is so I can make an investment decision fully reliant upon this, because they haven't gone through the right scrutiny. Now, when you are putting the assurance on top of it, that means that you will have had that process to ensure for the reader, and even for yourself, that what you have done actually meet the minimum requirement of your disclosure that sits under the different sort of approaches of assurance. So I think this 88% of ESG practitioners believe that assurance over the ESG data increases the likelihood that a company will achieve its goal. Again, it's so important that you have the right controls throughout your process, from a data sourcing, data manipulation, or data enhancement. You have the data controls sitting over that to ensure that what you put into the report have gone through the right scrutiny internally, even before you come to the assurance side. But that's obviously what you need to do to be able to achieve assurance of that part of the report. So now the assurance is probably what I would say is probably the one item that is so important, and what I believe brings the sustainability disclosure up to the level of financial disclosure, and why that is then making me really happy, because it means this is now, I'm not saying it hasn't been taken serious before, but I mean that this is now serious in the market for everyone. If you are going to use this for your investment decision, if you're going to use this to identify where there are needs for investment from a government or innovation, information you get now has gone through an assurance process, which means I can rely upon it. And I think that is what's going to help so many sort of different sectors and markets to actually improve even further.
And in terms of other findings, and this is, I suspect, related to what we talked about at the start, but you found that the steep challenges are going to undermine what confidence people have. But I presume that's referring to what we perhaps started with, that people are confident, but then they're a bit nervous about the new things on.
If we again, so I know that there's some fun numbers there. When I say fun numbers, there's some. So 98% say they are confident in the accuracy of the data. 83% also agree collecting accurate data to fulfill the requirement is going to be hard. Yes, it's a new process. There's a new teams involved. There's new sort of data requirements. Every time you have a new requirement, there will be sort of some, not uncertainty, but sort of some, you might take some time to get fully confident in the processes set up, because it's new and it's at a new level of detail. Hence, you will have these sort of discrepancies between we're confident we're going to report on it because we have to, we're going to do assurance, versus we are a bit nervous about where to find certain pieces of information or how to actually get certain data points. And again, what I said before, right? If we look at the statistics around the data points that is needed to meet the requirements, so it's out of the 1100 odd, I think there's a few more. They're releasing a new data table, which means that I think it's gone down a few data points, although the information hasn't disappeared. They just merged some data points. That's why I don't want to say a precise number, but over 1100 data points, 30% are numerical. And when we say numerical, if we look at, for instance, climate data, so emissions, scope 1 and 2, and that, firms have done that before. They know where to get that information. They have processes for it. There's carbon accounting tool they can use to sort of transform expenditure into a carbon number that they can then report on. That shouldn't give you that much sort of hardship and sort of lack of confidence, because that process exists. But if you then turn that around and say 70% is non-numerical, so semi-narrative or narrative, saying, okay, we're going to have to explain what our short, medium, and long-term targets are to reduce and meet sort of the Paris Agreement, for instance. What do we need to do in the short term? What do we need to do in the medium term? And what do we need to do in the long term to meet those numerical targets? All of a sudden, you are coming into an area where you probably haven't engaged with those teams internally before. You need to look at it in a way that, have you incorporated views from your research and development department in how they actually think you can achieve it by changing your process? It becomes very big, which means you then sort of start looking at it saying, this is going to be complex, hence I'm nervous about it. That's, to me, is just the normal behavior. But at the same time, I'm sure that everyone is saying, but we're going to do it because we are going to get there. Because there is no way now to not get there. They have to make sure that they will reach these targets, reach these reporting requirements. And because the disclosure has to happen when it needs to happen. And again, if we just do the parallel with financial disclosure, we all know that financial reporting has its pitfalls as well in complexity. And, there's always this rush at the end to make sure you get everything done. And, it's the same with this. It's a process that might not be perfect from the start, but it's going to you have to do it. So firms will find ways of doing it. Obviously, technology is a really key way of helping firms getting that. But yeah, that's.
Yeah, and in terms of other sort of findings, and so I think you mentioned it earlier on, but people do see that strong ESG reporting is, it's a competitive advantage. And then you mentioned technology, perhaps, maybe it's not directly related, but AI, everyone's talking about AI, and I think the survey, unsurprisingly, indicates that AI has a significant role to play. So perhaps, yeah, just the importance of ESG as a competitive advantage, and then what everyone's talking about, I guess, AI, what the likely impact is for this.
Yeah. So if we look at a competitive advantage, there's obviously certain areas that are sort of key. There are legal requirements upon you to meet that the country you operate in or the region you operate in that you have to meet, which means you're going to have to be able to show that you're going to meet it and how to get there, which means if you are saying, oh, we're not going to, we don't care, we're not going to meet it, we're going to be about it. The other side, the other company that you then do business with is probably going to say, I don't want to be so associated with you because I will be scrutinized with the people I do business with. So my supply chain and value chain. So all of a sudden, it's so I'm not going to do business with you because you're not going to meet the requirements the way that it's needed. And if I continue to do business with you, I'm going to look bad because I'm going to have to report on a company in my supply chain that is negatively going to impact me, which means my operations will be sort of negatively impacted. So there is, again, something that the competitive advantage of having a data disclosure, or having that disclosure and putting that information out is you are giving the market a view of your culture, your ethics, if you want to call it that, around sustainability related topics that you have to meet. Equally, one point that is getting more attention is obviously the people side, so the S, the social of the E, S, and G. The social aspect is obviously how do you treat your workforce, but not just your workforce. How is the workforce in the value chain? So are you associated or doing business with companies that actually are not treating their employees fairly? In which case, will the market then react negatively to you because you are associated with such a firm? Probably it could. We're looking at fast fashion. We're looking at some of the sporting goods. Like there's obviously been historical events that's happened, and these are things that now people are actually caring about. So a lot, just to cement that, if you look, historically, I think it was in 2019. Morgan Stanley had a white paper that came out that said that 87% of millennials care about sustainability related topics in their investment decision. That number now is far above 90%. The people that actually will start sort of doing their investments from a pension perspective, 401ks, whatever that is, and actually are deciding if they then make the decision rather than just allowing someone else to put it in somewhere. No, because it's become more normal now to say, I want my sort of pension to be invested in a sustainability related sort of fund or whatever it is. All of a sudden, these pieces of information actually will have a direct impact on that, because you then as an investor can say, I don't want my pension to be put there. And then the pension provider, or so the institutional investors that then provide those funds to put them together, are going to have to respond to that because the market has spoken about it. So by being very clear in where you stand now, because everyone will not be perfect from the start. We all know that. That's irresponsible, and so to consider irresponsible might be a harsh word, but I think it is, because sometimes I think by just the requirement coming out, we can't say that everyone will be perfect from the start. Obviously, give people time to put the information together and report on it. There's going to be improvements over the first few years as people get more comfortable with it, but what's then very important is for these firms to say how they're going to do improvements, what those targets are, and how they're going to get there, and then show the evidence that they're getting there. And that will then get the market to respond positively to them. Because if you are a lender, I know I'm going on a bit here, but these things tie together so much. It's an ecosystem of it. So if you're a lender, a bank, lending money to a company that is showing a good progress towards being more sustainable, that exposure for the bank is more sustainable, which means that bank can then report that they are more sustainable because they are funding a more sustainable activity. So that goes in a circle. So there's this whole sort of ecosystem between all of these different parts actually ties together, and a bank or a lender or investor is scrutinized of what they are putting money in, which means that they will decide, they will put money, if they are sustainability, so if they take sustainability serious, they will put money in a company or lend money rather to someone that actually are doing activity that is more sustainable. So that's also another sort of bit of a carrot for companies to be like, oh, I'm going to have to show this and prove this to not just my investors, but also to my financiers, my lender, whatever it is, that the sustainability part of my reporting is true and accurate, and we are moving forward to move the needle.
And I say then there's the AI aspect.
Yes, AI,
which I'm sure, as I say, it's creeping in everywhere. So what's it likely to what's its likely impact in this area?
AI it should be used for as a sort of. Sorry, I'm going to start again. So with AI, we have already heard firms using generative AI as a way to start their disclosures from a narrative text perspective, for instance, to be able to say, I need help starting to write something around this topic. Obviously, you can't just take it and say, here we go, it's done. Let's put it in the report and move on. But what it's there for is to help firms start. For instance, imagine if you're sitting responsible for reporting on a sustainability disclosure, you're responsible for one part of it, and your historical experience is not to write such a report or give such information. Rather, you are more operationally aligned, that you're doing stuff. But now, because you know most about this specific part of your business, you might have to be able to provide a bit of information to the report that is then being incorporated there. Using AI as a starting point is a prime example of a helper that is so important for these firms to use, to not sort of extend the process too much or make the process so unbearably hard. Rather, saying there are helpers out there for us to be able to kickstart. And the longer we go on, like the more information that's available for it, the more reports that have been put out there, I think we can see a further sort of enhancement of it to use it in even more depth around, target setting. What is actually an achievable target compared to peers in the market? Can we use it for that? So what are an appropriate process enhancement to meet such targets? Well, let's see what happens over the next year. Now, how I see it, there might be my sort of limited depth knowledge of AI in general, but how I would use it and what I've heard firms in sustainability department using it for is to kickstart your disclosures that is narrative based, to be able to then take that as a starting point and then form it and shape it to your users. So you are not starting from a blank piece of paper. You're starting rather from something which, as an ex-consultant, even if someone drew a line on a PowerPoint slide, it was easier to start from that than it was from starting from a completely blank piece of slide. So, I can understand that. To me, is a really sort of good use case to use it for.
Okay, and in terms of the sort of what we've covered, what would you say are the if it's possible to do this, the one or two key sort of takeaways, the things that people should focus on as they either addressing the the new directive or just want to ensure that their ESG strategy moving forward is fit for purpose, if you like.
Yeah, so the first point that is so important to understand, to actually incorporate in the thinking and all that, is that this is no longer a singular department's responsibility. This is a cross-organizational responsibility. You need to set the tone from the top when it comes from the board and the executives that this is actually something we fundamentally are focusing on. We take it seriously. So the culture incorporates sustainability in every aspect of it. And then why I'm saying this is because if you do that, and then you say in your production process, sustainability is considered, in your recycling will then be involved in that, circular economy, all of a sudden, you are creating data, so points that can then be used for reporting, but then also for your reporting aspect. The reporting process is no longer just the sustainability department pulling information together. Finance has a massive part to play in this because it's obviously linked to financial numbers, a lot of it. Finance equally is important to have on your side here because they have done this type of reporting that is getting scrutinized in this type of way. Equally, we're not going to go into the XBRL tagging. That's another point that finance has done. So they electronically tag information. Use your resources that knows how to do it. Information around how to get to certain targets, how to achieve them, what changes need to happen. Your operations need to be involved in that. What I mean with this, so shorting it down, is this is a cross-organizational impact. And if you don't have people involved from all aspects of your organization, it's going to be really hard to get a report that fully represents your organization. And that's where you want to get to, because that's also then the time where you start seeing, so hopefully, cultural changes. And I'm going to say one of my favorite sayings around it, not say, but one of it's I've stolen it from Paul Dickinson, from CDP, to the founder of CDP, and I know he got it from somewhere else as well. He said that the sustainability disclosures is the X-ray before the surgery. That's exactly how it's looked at, right? Or you should look at it, because you can't do a surgery without an X-ray, which means you cannot do you can't do government interventions or investments, innovations, and all that without knowing where we stand. So that's what the reporting obviously is there for, and that means that you need to have a lot of these people involved to get that right pieces of information to be put out to the market. So that's one that's really important to me, is get everyone involved. Secondly, this is a process, right? So to be able to do this is a process. And for those processes, controls are needed. You need to have a robust control and governance framework around your process to be able to do reporting, so that when you have your assurance, you can evidence to your auditors that we have followed these ones. Because if you don't have it, they are going to question who has reviewed, or how it's, do you have a control over this that we can see how it works, whatever. If you don't have it, the process will obviously become null and void, because how can you evidence that what you have put together is actually correct? Has it gone through those right steps? And then I'm actually going to steal one more, and I'm going to say a third one: technology. Technology is going to be so important for you to be able to pull this information together, get the right people involved to collaborate. Obviously, coming from Workiva, with the platform we have, you can do all that. But what's even more important, and what we also heard, is obviously employee retention. If you don't invest in technology that would help you streamline a process or speed up a process, enhance collaboration, secure, if secure is the right word, but put controls over that process automatically, the time spent by people to pull this information together is going to be so enormous, and it's going to be such a hard job, and it's going to be broken down, which you're going to lose people because of a bad process and technology setup. So by having technology setup, by having the right sort of platform or right sort of technology in place, you will, you shorten the time from provide review, you shorten the time from putting stuff together as you can collaborate. You are sort of allowing to put responsibilities on other people to provide information for you. Instead of getting an email and a Word doc, a document that you then have to have version control on, you can then just do something in a singular platform. If you have that capabilities, that will help you enormously in just streamlining and making the process more bearable for anyone involved.
Yeah, and maybe that, I mean, you mentioned obviously the Workiva platform. Perhaps we can finish it, because obviously you've done a lot of explaining about what's going on this year, and I'm guessing Workiva is able to help folks with some of this. So yeah, just where does Workiva fit within this landscape?
Well, yeah. So we're only sort of platform that actually can proudly say we offer the full suite to meet assured integrated reporting requirements, right? We have financial disclosure, ESG, sustainability, disclosure, the governance, risk and compliance, which means the actual control frameworks on top of it. And we're the world leading provider of the XBRL tagging, which are all sort of the parts of the CSRD that you need to have together to be able to actually meet the requirements. I jokingly said in December 2022, when the ESRSs came out, that said it's like they have written them for the Workiva platform, because they required disclosure. We have it. Controls, of course, assurance. We have been working with auditors already, where the auditing process becomes easier by doing it through our platform, because they can actually access the platform so instead of having to be at a place or having to do the work, they can look at the audit trail fully on the platform. Linking of information. This is one of our key unique selling points. You have one singular source of truth, meaning if you're putting something in your financial report, but that's also something that relatable to your sustainability report, you use the information twice, but you only have to do the process once, which means you link it to numerous of places in the report. XBRL tagging. So we are, as I said, we're the leader of XBRL tagging processes in the world. We are a member of the Digital Reporting Consultative Forum at EFRAG. So we have been testing and helping EFRAG set the XBRL taxonomy for the ESRS, or the European Sustainability Reporting Standard. So we already have it on. We've been able to. The draft version is we've been able to make work. So it's all working. So we obviously ticking all of these boxes that will help firms streamline a process from data sourcing to the process of both gathering specific information, but also general information, meaning either financial or tabletized information from emissions, or specific targeted to a certain point in the reporting requirements. All of this is set up as an automatic process. Everyone have access to then work collaboratively in the report, meaning you don't have to sit and wait for someone to send you a version and then go in, so you can all work at the same time. Controls, we have that control framework on top of all of that, and then the auditors can have access to the platform to see the audit trails from start to finish and how everything has worked. And as I said, just to reiterate, the XBRL tagging at the end of it, when you put it all into one singular report, a short integrated report, which can be done fully through our platform.
Okay, it's been great to chat to you, and some brilliant insights into what's going on in ESG, and it's clearly a busy time, exciting. Henrik, I really appreciate your time. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Philip.
Thank you.